Hey, everybody. Today we are talking about the MBA, we're talking about the CFA, and we're talking about Master in Finance programs. This is actually something that came up in a conversation I had yesterday, which is how do you compare and contrast these three? How effective are each of these programs at getting you to the next level in your career? And particularly with a focus on finance, whether it's investment banking, private equity investing, or anything else in finance, to what extent did these programs and credentials help you get to that next step? Welcome to the Breaking Into Finance podcast. Let's dive in. I've been thinking a lot about this recently, just thinking about, the role of the MBA, the role of the Master in Finance degree, and that programming, and the role of the CFA. And when I talk about CFA, I'm talking about level 3 CFA certifications. There are steps. They're increasingly difficult, as you advance across each step. And, a question that I've been getting a lot, particularly from folks who are 1 to 4 years out of undergrad, and some have been working, in finance, but want to pivot to a different role in finance. Others are not working in finance right now, but want to break into it for the first time. And I've heard from a lot of people that they've been compelled to look at the CFA, and they've gotten this advice that the CFA is kind of the right next step for them. And for some people, it absolutely is. But I actually have kind of an interesting take on this, which is that I think that the level of just education that people who go through these programs are learning, it turns out, I don't think that it's causal, but I think it is inversely proportional to the value to you in your career. I want to pause on that for a second. The educational benefits of each of these programs are inversely proportional to the benefit to your career. That is a crazy thing for me to be saying, nominally running an educational podcast, but I think it's true. And really what it comes down to is the other valuable things that you get from this programming beyond just the education. So let me talk about what I mean. The CFA, getting, your level 1, then level 2, and then level 3 CFA certification has huge educational benefits. You, by being, level 3 certified, CFA, you are learning a ton about pretty much every realm of finance. And the benefits are that you will get this kind of really great and impressive holistic understanding of the industry. Also, as a credential, it is very valuable to employers. Employers who see that you have level 3 certification on your CFA, that makes up for a lot in terms of prior experience. So if you were someone who's looking to break into that, investment banking role, and, you didn't get the internship, didn't get the first job out of college, and you're kind of thinking how do I not only establish that I'm interested in this space, but that I know a lot and can contribute a lot? Well, that level 3 CFA certification is huge for demonstrating not only your interest, but also your knowledge and subject knowledge and what you'll bring going into that role. The CFA is also really broadly applicable. We haven't talked a lot about asset management on this show and wealth management, but that is a huge industry. There is a lot of opportunity there. And the CFA includes information about, portfolio theory and efficiency frontiers and all of this kind of asset management work that is not directly relevant to a private equity job. In fact, you wouldn't use any of that at all, but it is relevant for asset management. And I think in asset management, that credential means a lot, not only for your employers, but also for your clients, the folks who you'll be advising on these sorts of topics. And so the CFA lends to a really broad swath of opportunities, whether it's across, FP&A, asset management, investment banking. There's a lot of things you can do with it. But there's one critical thing that the other two programs have that the CFA lacks, and that is the alumni network, the strength of the alumni network associated with the school and program you're participating in. And that is the number one reason why it is less meaningful and less impactful than the MBA and then a master's in finance program. It is certainly a strange world that we live in that's true. It's odd, counterintuitive, and a little bit nonsensical that the network supersedes the value of the education. But I'm a pragmatist. I'm here to give you guys kind of boots on the ground, my view of like what I've seen work. And it's those networks that work and that are more powerful often than, the holistic education. Now, you'll learn a lot in an MBA program and you'll learn a lot in a master's in finance program. So there's plenty of education there too, but the emphasis is really on the network. That network is 97%, of the value you're deriving from those programs. And there's a reason why, tuition is so expensive. So that's the next thing I want to talk about. Master in finance programs. How do you know if it's worth it and if it's right for you? I want to bifurcate a little bit between the type of person who should be going into an MBA program and the type of person who should be going into a master's in finance program. Folks I know who've successfully leveraged the master's in finance degree, or even just the admission to the school, is that they tend to be earlier in their career. So the master's in finance degree is wonderful for seniors in undergrad who, might have struck out with internships, are still interested in pivoting into this, and view any other job as either unproductive for advancing their goals or perhaps even counterproductive because they're worried about getting pigeonholed, or typecast into a role that they don't think represents their interests and their goals. So master's in finance directly out of undergrad, or maybe, with a gap year, like 1 year out of undergrad, I think there are a number of tremendous success stories with that route. By contrast, these days, nobody goes into the MBA program straight out of undergrad. It is virtually never done. MBA programs and admissions teams likely won't admit you. And it just, and a lot of people just don't apply. And the biggest reason is that coming out of the MBA, the types of roles that are available to you are a little bit more senior. And MBA admissions folks have noticed that people who come in with even 2 years of experience, whether it's 2 years, 5 years, 10 years of professional experience or post-undergrad experience, that augments the business education in a way where they've seen, some stuff, live and in person, and that augments the educational opportunity. If, I get questions on this a lot from people whose parents work in finance, and they kind of have this, 40 years outdated conception of, business schools or something that people do directly out of undergrad. Used to be true often. It doesn't happen at all anymore. It used to be very common. Now it never happens. So if you are, a senior, if you are 1 year out of school, 2 years out of school, you should consider a master's in finance program as that first step rather than the MBA. But that also means another thing. That means that if you are going into the MBA program, a lot of the roles that you'll be recruiting for post-MBA are mid-level roles. They might be senior associate roles, VP roles. In cases where you have direct prior industry experience, you might even be looking at, a principal role, depending on the firm. But usually you're looking at this kind of senior associate or VP level roles. Whereas coming out of a master's in finance program, again, in part because a lot of people who are going into these programs are younger and earlier in their careers, you're likely looking at an analyst role. And so if you are sitting here today thinking, man, I want to recruit for an analyst role, like I'd kill for an analyst position at one of these firms, the master's in finance program might be the right one for you. If you have been an analyst, maybe you're an associate, and you're thinking about, transitioning or making some sort of, career switch, that's where you should start considering the MBA. So that is kind of the quick summary on each of these things. You know me, I love my caveats to everything. particularly now. We're sitting here in the end of November, and it's worth keeping in mind the calendar of application cycles for these programs. The CFA, you can get started, on level 1 if you haven't yet. You can get started on that whenever you want. And all of that learning will help you in the MBA recruiting process or the Masters in Finance admission process. Having that credential is definitely going to help your application. It's going to make your application look better, but it's not going to define your application. It will definitely help, but I would not recommend waiting for you to move up the levels of CFA certification to submit your application. I'm a big fan of, just apply now because the time is right. And a lot of these Masters in Finance programs, most of them have rolling admission. So you could apply, in March, you could apply in April, you could apply in February, and you could still find out for, the academic year that starts 2024 into 2025. MBA programs. Now is the time to apply to those MBA programs. For the top schools, for Harvard, for Stanford, for Wharton, their round 1 window passed in September. That round 1 window is usually where they accept a lot of the people who are coming from consulting, investment banking, and private equity investing backgrounds. People who've been on the path for years. The expectation is they'll be buttoned up, they'll apply early, and that's when they accept a lot of those candidates at those 3 schools. For pretty much every other MBA program, this is the prime time, the prime window to be applying. So I mentioned this earlier. I had a conversation the other day with a family member of a friend who was kind of thinking about different options, thinking about, what he wanted to do. And he had taken level 1. He'd gotten his level 1 certification, the CFA, and was studying for level 2. And my recommendation to him was drop the pen on that. See if you can sign up for a GMAT test, start studying for the GMAT, and start working on your MBA applications, because this is the time between now and, some schools have rolling admissions, some have a January, window is kind of the next deadline. This is a wonderful time to be applying to those MBA programs. It's a lot of work. The GMAT is another standardized test. It's another series of essays and applications. But if you have at least 2 years of professional experience, this is the time to be applying. And I wouldn't self-limit yourself. Like, you can kind of see how the GMAT scores go. You can sort of think about, what you're going to do. But now is really the time to focus on the MBA program. This is the critical month for you. And if you can get it done, that's awesome. The other thing you can think about is this Masters in Finance program. And that is probably at this stage of the year how I'd sequence it. So MBA program, working hard on it, cranking over the next month, trying to get those applications in by early January. Masters in Finance programs, I'd work on that directly after. And then I really view kind of the late winter, spring, and summer as great times to be working on, CFA prep and, and studying for those tests. So there is a way that you could be working on all 3 of these at once. By the way, the subject matter, that you're learning in each, I think helps with the others. And the other thing I'd mention is that, all of this builds towards the career goals that you want. So if you get that, level 2 CFA certification and you got accepted to a Masters in Finance program, well, now that you're doing that Masters in Finance degree, having that CFA certification is still going to help you. Like, you have the alumni network, you'll have what you're learning in school. The classes will probably be easier because you'll be learning some things for the second time that you already studied for the CFA. So higher GPA, and then also another credential on your resume when you're applying to jobs. 2 other things I want to mention, 2 huge potential values of these degree programs is the virtue signaling that it represents to the world. You've already heard from folks on this podcast who just applied and got admitted to Masters in Finance programs and used that admission to get an internship and even get a full-time job. And then they ended up not even going to the program. So Even if you are nervous about the cost of these programs, and the cost can be really high, still apply, because just the fact that you got admitted is a badge and a signal that you can use to market yourself in the meantime before classes even start. I want to talk a little bit about the cost though, because it is expensive, and this is often the number one thing that I hear from people about what makes them, nervous or scared. In my particular case, going to Wharton, it was extremely expensive. Now, I did have the benefit of 2 different fellowships that, reduced, the tuition I had paid by like tens and tens of thousands of dollars. But it's still crazy expensive, not only the tuition, but you're paying rent, you're paying your living expenses. Wharton, there's a lot of like travel that I took advantage of. And the biggest thing is I wasn't working. I wasn't earning a full-time paycheck, and that opportunity cost should absolutely be a part of your math. I will say that, on average, especially if you're thinking about pivoting into finance and you're not doing it today, but you want to in the future, the ROI is there for you. Like you just will make more money coming out of it. But you also, the flip side of this high tuition, this is true for the MBA. It is especially true for the Master's in Finance programs, is that these degrees are big money makers for the schools that offer these degrees. These are profitable opportunities and profitable degrees that these schools have that subsidize things like research and PhD programs and all this other stuff, and school operations. So you need to do your own research, whatever the program is that you're thinking about applying to, about whether the opportunities that are available to you after graduating map to your expectations about what you want from the program. And the number one way to do that is not by reading a school brochure or like looking at all these happy photos of all these things that these cherry-picked group of people have gone on to do. The way to look at this is go on LinkedIn and search for alumni of that particular degree program, and see if any of them are at the places where you want to work. So if your goal is, you say, hey, I want to be, an investment banking associate at Goldman after going through an MBA program. Well, what you should do is you should figure out which schools are actually sending, recruits to that program. And by the way, in the case of, investment banks, just like consulting firms, like to take, a handful of different MBAs from a lot of different schools. So you don't just need to go to Wharton if you want to get, a fancy, investment banking associate job. I think all sorts of these schools send folks to these programs. I think there's a lot of Kellogg folks. There's a lot of Duke Fuqua folks. There's a lot of Chapel Hill MBAs. There's a lot of Tuck MBAs, Sloan MBAs. So these are like McCombs in Texas. Ross. I mean, it's a really big list of MBA programs that, Goldman, just as one example, hires from. And I think it's kind of true across these, investment banks. And so there's a lot of schools that are available to you, though these are still, call it top 15, top 20 business schools. So, one example is, if you're looking at an MBA program at a school like, University of Colorado or UVM, two places where I've lived, two places where I have family that have gone to, the MBA programs at those schools don't really lean into finance in the same way that they do at some of these other schools. And as a result, you will have a much more difficult time recruiting for investment banking from a school that does not send a lot of MBAs into investment banking. And look, part of that is, you're going to get asked, like, why'd you decide to go to this program versus another program that sends more folks here? But the more important thing is just the alumni network won't be there. And I can't emphasize enough how important that alumni network is. So as you're thinking about different credentials, different ways you can use to kind of build your knowledge, signal, or have resume bullet items that support your ability to transition into the space, I would heavily weight the value of the network and who you will meet and, how they can help you in your career. That should be the number one thing on your mind. And education is obviously extremely important. But, by the way, my hope is that you can get a lot of that education just by listening to this podcast, just by listening and going back to the early episodes of this show. All of the shows where there's big technicals in all caps. If you're new and listening to this, listen to all those episodes, and you're going to learn everything that you're going to need for that investment banking private equity job. And so there's a lot of ways to get that education. That's going to be how you succeed in the interviews. But the way you get those interviews is through your network. So those are a couple quick thoughts on CFA versus Masters in Finance versus MBA. As always, I welcome questions on this. If you are someone who is debating across these programs, please shoot me a note. We'll hop on. We'll do an interview. We'll talk about it together. And if you have follow-up questions, please let me know. And as always, thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time. That does it for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. And remember to check out our website, breakingintofinancepodcast.com, where you can submit questions, join our Substack to stay up to date on new content releases, and much, much more. We'll see you next time.